One of the great paradoxes in the history of basketball is its relationship to the overall process of industrialization. Dr. James Naismith, the game's founder, was a Canadian physical education instructor who had been deeply affected by what was known as the muscular Christianity movement. This was a movement situated around the idea that men were becoming progressively weakened in mind, body, and spirit, while losing their moral center in the face of nascent industrialization that was transforming the American economy at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. The invention of basketball, although ultimately a flash of sudden insight that Naismith had one day that led him to formulate the game's initial 13 rules, was brought forth in the context of those greater social and religious sentiments that were responding to the profound social dislocation that was being brought forth by the new productive forces of American industry. And this is paradoxical because when we move from the year 1891 in Springfield, Massachusetts, when the game was invented, to urban centers across America in the post-war era, what we see is that this is the period from the 1960s to the 1990s when the game of basketball self-developed most intensely. All of these stylistic innovations that we now take for granted, the alley-oop, the dribbling and ball handling wizardry that now dominates the NBA, the fast break and the slam dunk, such creative breakthroughs were endlessly worked out on the blacktops and gymnasiums of urban neighborhoods in post-war urban America. In other words, even as the game of basketball was partially invented in response to America's rapid industrialization, it developed itself most profoundly during America's deindustrialization, as the urban American economy in the post-war era was fractured and outsourced, thus leading to a profound socioeconomic crisis that not only plagued the urban neighborhoods of post-war urban America, but also paradoxically created the social ground for the game of basketball to develop so effectively. And this brings us to the present moment regarding urban basketball culture in contemporary America and how it differentiates itself both from the period of industrialization and the period of deindustrialization. What we are now seeing in basketball culture is its response to the effect of gentrification, or even hyper-gentrification, which is the urban process that now acts as the structuring logic of cities across America. At its most elementary, we can define gentrification as a social process that reconstitutes human beings into contingent instruments of a purely capitalist and technical exchange in all areas of urban life. In many ways, you could say that this is the precise same definition of neoliberal globalization, the abstract process structured by the double movement of capital and digitized technologies that now, in many ways, defines human life across the planet in the 21st century. What distinguishes gentrification from globalization is only the fact that gentrification refers specifically to what occurs within urban space, whereas globalization refers to the overall planetary process itself. The basic drive of gentrification is to progressively reconstitute the human community that resides in cities into a kind of social machinery, a machinery based on economic exchange, technological mediation, and a kind of perennial surveillance. What this means in practical terms when we apply this to something like the game of basketball is that gentrification wants to turn basketball into something that is quantifiable, marketable, and somehow traceable through streams of data and informatics. In other words, under the power of gentrification, basketball is no longer simply a quote-unquote game, a game to have fun with, or a game to develop human values such as personal discipline, teamwork, and self-confidence. Instead, basketball becomes, first and foremost, a business, a utilitarian enterprise divorced from qualitative value. It becomes a site of investment and reproduction in the form of everything ranging from sneaker companies to AAU teams looking to monetize youth talent, to the countless uploaded YouTube videos that perpetually attempt to generate likes, views, and new basketball content to circulate in the world of digital objects. Additionally, we have the fact that the very social ground that supported the post-war urban basketball culture, the working class African American and ethnic neighborhoods, public housing projects, and the various parks and public spaces that once nurtured the game of basketball, also become subject to the law of gentrification. Such neighborhoods are transformed from working class urban communities to proper gentrified spaces. Affordable apartments are replaced by high-priced condominiums. Local businesses with family ties to the neighborhood are replaced by chain coffee stores, and new businesses that cater specifically only to the fluctuations of the contemporary marketplace. And then public spaces themselves become progressively privatized and socially alienated from their continual exposure to the meta-logic of gentrification. So, what exactly happens to contemporary urban basketball in this scenario? Well, of course, collective local talent depreciates dramatically. And when a talented young player does emerge, he or she is often sent away from the neighborhood to play in the AAU and prep school circuit instead, rather than attending a local public school and being symbolically rooted in their neighborhood of origin. And then you have the accompanying technology, the material representation that signifies the logic of gentrification operative in social space. A new basketball product on the market perfectly discloses the trajectory of basketball, and all American sports for that matter, as they become more and more gentrified. I am referring here to the new ball, known as the 9450 ball, the technologically infused basketball that grabs 6,000 bits of information per second. To quote from an article describing the various technical features of the new ball, quote, "Now that a new regulation-sized normal-looking basketball can transmit 6,000 bits of data per second, maybe we could all move on to creating robot players. The 9450 ball, which is named for the dimensions of a pro or college basketball court and will go on sale in April, bills itself as the world's first smart basketball and is meant to turn even a simple layup into a pile of data. The ball, with its data retrieval system, will cost $295. It supposedly feels like a regular ball even as it conducts its on-court surveillance. And while this is a ball that needs to be recharged, hey, it's the 21st century, so don't worry, the ball can be recharged wirelessly." Founder and CEO Michael Crowley of the Dublin, Ohio-based InfoMotion Sports Technologies says the 6 sensors embedded into the ball's exterior can transmit data within 100 milliseconds to Android smart devices located up to 90 feet away. The system includes an app that offers suggestions to players to improve their form. End quote. The first mistake in reading this brief description of the 9450 ball is to passively assume that it is simply, quote-unquote, just another basketball. This is a profoundly naive interpretation if attempting to honestly give account to the landscape of contemporary basketball and its relation to urban American neighborhoods. Because what this ball speaks to is precisely the ongoing collapse of urban basketball away from what it once was, the intersubjective meaning it generated, and how it was once such an essential component in constructing urban narratives and myths. That is to say, city basketball was often at its best, its most creative and dynamic, social form in the unrestrained and unsupervised pickup basketball game on the city playground. The pickup game, an activity that was once institutional in urban neighborhoods throughout the country, was not simply the predominant form of city basketball, but it was also, specifically from the 1960s to the late 1990s, the very medium that radically transformed the game for the better. The pickup game was the authentic social encounter, in the sense that it developed naturally within the texture of the neighborhood, but yet still had within it a formal logic that generated a continual improvement of itself. This logic can be summarized as follows. If you won, you continued to play. If you lost, you had to leave the court and wait. Post-war basketball was simultaneously highly creative and ruthlessly utilitarian. But with the 94-50 ball, the whole idea of a pickup game is essentially foreclosed, obliterated in a stream of data and capitalist surveillance. The game of basketball, as a beautiful demonstration of human drama and struggle unfolding within the context of an evolving sport, rather becomes with this ball, as it has become for cities at large under the influence of gentrification, a purely quantitative activity linked directly to the interrelated logic of global capitalism, network technologies, and a system of surveillance. What this means is that if a young boy's parents were to buy this ball for him as a gift, we can never say that this ball is something that the boy can go outside with his friends and quote-unquote have fun with, or take to the park and quote-unquote play with. What rather happens with this ball is that it functions for the boy and his parents as a pseudo-corporate relationship, monitoring the data that the boy produces while using the ball and analyzing it for a specific performance trend, so to improve the boy's game in a purely quantitative way. So regardless of the 94-50 ball's potentially helpful analytic functions, what it ultimately does is far worse than the benefit it may offer. It tears basketball away from its greatest asset, the intersubjective, organic, collective intelligence that was once demonstrated on a daily basis in city parks and gymnasiums across the country. Gentrification, which is simply the urban species to the overall genus of global capitalism, is a continual process of flattening all urban life for the purpose of more efficient economic exchange and technical surveillance. And furthermore, the logic of gentrification always presents itself in neutral terms. It wants to appear to its observers as just the way things are. Something like gentrification would never present itself as a charged ideological process that could potentially be the cause of the decline of urban basketball and the various communities that once supported it. And here we finally come to the important question, which is what exactly can the urban basketball community do about this? How does one resist this mutation that has had such devastating effects on the intersubjective texture of urban neighborhoods, not to mention the mental health of young players across the country? And of course the answer is nothing. But that is not necessarily a bad thing once you can see it.